How has being aware of fat content helped you on your weight loss journey? I know, and maintenance, because you lost over 50 pounds and you've kept it off for over 8 years. Am I correct?
Well, now we're at like, yeah, 10 years now. It's really, and again, I didn't invent this work, calorie density. Dr. Barbara Rolls at Penn State really did all the research. But the people in our plant-based space have been teaching it. For example, Dr. Dean Ornish, when he wrote his book, Eat More, Weigh Less, or Dr. McDougall's program for maximum weight loss, when I drastically lowered the amount of calories from added fat to my diet, I was for the first time able to not only lose these 60 pounds, but lose them effortlessly and keep them off. And people think, well, you don't eat any fat. Okay. I mean, I think unless you're just drinking water, it's pretty impossible to be on a zero fat diet because everything has fat. Even fruit has trace amounts of fat, I think like 1%. Even greens have about 3% of their calories from fat, but these are the essential fats, the omega-3 fatty acids. And a whole grain like oats has almost 20% of its calories from fat. So I don't eat a no fat diet, but I eat a low fat diet because I really am very mindful about the amount of added fat coming from places like nuts, seeds, and avocados.
And oil, which you
And
do.
oil, yeah. Well, I definitely eat an oil-free diet. The only way that I would ever get oil would probably be, not accidentally like in a restaurant or somebody's house, but definitely, yeah, oil. Oh gosh, even people that aren't vegan, and I wish everybody would be vegan, if they are struggling with weight, it is such. It's 4,000 calories per pound. There's nothing on the planet. There's nothing in nature that's 4,000 calories per pound. The olives that it was made from are something like 400 to 600 calories per pound. That's if you think about it, sugar and oil are very similar in that, we take beets or sugar beets. They're about 195 calories per pound. We process them into beet sugar. They're now 1,800 calories per pound with all the fiber, nutrients, and water removed. We take something like olives, which I believe are 4 to 6. I don't have it memorized, but then we process it in a processing facility using a toxic chemical called lye, and we take out all the water and fiber, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, micronutrients, and we're left with this sludge, this liquid that's 4,000 calories per pound. That's basically non-nutritive. And what people don't understand, yeah, you need fat, but you don't need oil. Anything that is beneficial to you in any oil, coconut oil, flaxseed oil, avocado oil, olive oil, you could have gotten from the whole food. And when you eat food in its whole food form, you get everything nature intended, the water, the fiber, vitamins, minerals. And like that's been the point I've been trying to drive home since 2010 with my first book on process, that we're just really not meant to eat processed food. And I don't think we're really meant to eat animal products, but that's a harder argument to win. But there are people that, maybe want to improve their diet to the degree that they're willing. Nobody's supposed to eat processed food, especially children. And Americans eat something like 67% or more of their calories from processed food. And it is addictive. And, I was one of the first people in the plant-based world saying, hey, just because sugar and flour are low in fat, for some of us with these sensitive brains, there's a real trigger for us to overeat.
And so, how do you get your desserts to be moist with no oil? That's the argument that my mother gives me when I say, no, don't do oil, don't do oil. And yes, let's start with that. And then we can talk about the different sugars and flours.
So, your mother, maybe, would she have been around during World War II by any chance, or was she a child around World War II?
Yes, she was in
Okay.
Britain, actually.
Okay, so then she may or may not remember this if she wasn't in the United States, but they had these things called depression cakes, and I have a very old Hershey cookbook. I was making cakes without oil before I knew oil was bad because oil's expensive. Oil makes it harder to clean up, and there was a Hershey recipe that came around during the Depression, and the reason is because things like oil and eggs were very, very expensive, and so they were able to figure out, like in the 1940s, that you can make a cake rise without eggs by using baking powder, baking soda, and vinegar, and that you could make things moist with applesauce. So there are other ways now you can use. There's so many different egg substitutes now: flax eggs, chia eggs. There's something in a little bottle that's an egg substitute. There's so many different things. People are using aquafaba. But in terms of oil, you do need moisture. I mean, not every recipe. If you're trying to make a crisp cookie or something dehydrated, maybe not so much moisture because you're drying it anyway. But for example, applesauce is one of my first go-tos. Mashed banana, prune puree, baby food that comes in a jar that's prune, apple butter, for example, tofu, pumpkin. So there's so many things you can do to get moisture that is an oil. And that's actually healthier for you because you're going to get the fiber and all the nutrients.
And what about the sugar, the sweetness, I should say? Tell us about the fruits and some vegetables that you're using to add sweetness to these delicious recipes.
Absolutely. So once you get a little bit neuroadapted, you will find that you will taste the subtle sweetness in food, even like a piece of iceberg lettuce, where you're like, well, that's not sweet, really, because it does have a subtle sweetness. Vegetables like zucchini have a subtle sweetness. So I just like with the sugar scale about more sweet and less sweet. So we're going to talk about dried fruits first because they're going to have the greatest impact in terms of sweetness. Because when something is dried, that means the water's been removed. The fiber's still there, but with the water removed, they're going to taste more intensely sweet. That also means they're going to be a little bit more calorically dense because, for example, apples and berries are about 200 calories per pound, bananas about 400, dates or any dried fruit for that matter, raisins, dried cherries are going to be about 1,300 calories per pound. But I would argue that it's still better for you than sugar, which is 1,800 calories per pound. Or we haven't even gotten into the artificial sweeteners, which I think are actually worse than sugar. So dates are going to probably be the most intensely sweet. Now, with dates, you can make them into a syrup. And in my first book on processed, I had a recipe, but it took like an hour because you had to boil and reduce and blend. Now you can get organic date syrup in pretty much every market, including Walmart. So I don't bother making my own. It's just not worth my time. And you could probably make syrups out of other fruit too, prunes, apricots. I haven't tried it, but it's basically the same principle about boiling and reducing and things like that. I prefer to use, whenever possible, date paste, which is available commercially, but very easy to make your own simply by soaking pitted dates in any liquid. Usually I use water because it's free, and then blending it in your food processor and not getting rid of the liquid. And you have this just lovely paste that could be used if you eat bread as a jam substitute. But most of my recipes are made with that. Of course, there's a heck of a lot of recipes that don't even have dates, that I'm just using things like bananas, apples, sweet potatoes, not necessarily the orange ones, but the ones that are called either Hana yams, Jersey yams, or Japanese. They're really, really sweet, especially if you roast them.
Are those the sweet white potatoes that you talked about?
Yes. Oh my God. That's what I just had for lunch. That's what I eat for lunch every day. It's my favorite food in the whole world with broccoli, Hana yams and broccoli, or white sweet potatoes, depending on where you live. They might have a different name.
Okay, well, I know that that was a key ingredient in a lot of the frosting that you were
Yes,
talking.
because they're white. See, because the orange sweet potatoes, or they're also, I think they're called garnet yams. They're good. They're orange, but they're a little mushier and they're not as sweet. But the white sweet potato flesh, they're fantastic for simulating a vanilla frosting.
And what about dates? You talk about the different kinds of dates in the book that you can use, either for your date paste or for dates. Tell us which ones you prefer.
No, I prefer the cheapest. I really do. Because if I'm eating a date as a snack, which I generally don't do, and if I did, I would eat my favorite date called the Bari, Bahri, which tastes like Kraft caramel. I'm not going to eat a date. I mean, it's not that I'm not going to ever do it, but in general, they're just too sweet for me. I'm going to get the most cost-effective one, which are the Deglet Nor. And what I like about the Deglet Nor is the price at Costco. I've never seen a lower price anywhere online. Are phenomenal if you have a Costco available to you. But also the Deglet Nor, they tend to come pitted. And if you're using a lot of dates, let's face it, pitting them is no fun if you're having to pit a pound or two here and there. And I find that the Deglet Nor are a little drier. And you're like, well, why would you want it drier? Okay, so you might not want it drier. It depends on the recipe. But I find the medjool are just so incredibly moist that if I'm trying to make a crust where I'm blending date and nut or oat and nut, the medjool tend to be just so sticky that I have to like bake it for a few minutes to get that stickiness off. But the Deglet Nor tend to be a little bit drier, and I find that it's just for me easier to work with. But there's nothing wrong with using the ones you have. But medjool dates are going to be a lot more expensive, especially organic, than the Deglet Nor.